Well, peace, salam, and shalom to our regular class participants, and welcome to all the new friends if there are any joining us for the first time in our interfaith explorations. I'm Sophia Said, Executive Director of the Interfaith Center of Arkansas, also the Chair of Medina Institute and Mosque in Central Arkansas. The Interfaith Center is a nonprofit organization. We are committed to reducing the fear and hatred among world religions. And our work is guided by the understanding that if we gain appreciative knowledge about different faiths and create meaningful relationships with people of those religions, it will change our attitudes towards that faith community. Our classes are co sponsored by Cobb Institute in California. And along with me is my dear friend, our moderator for the class, Dr. J. McDaniel, who served on the board of Cobb Institute. The institute is named in the honor of its founder, John Cobb, and it works towards a process and relational way of understanding and living in the world. They share wisdom, emphasize harmony, and focus on the common good. All of our classes are recorded and they're available on YouTube. So I would ask all of you to please keep your mics muted at this time till we start the discussion. And at that time, you can always unmute yourself and ask a question. If you missed last class, I would highly encourage you to go to our YouTube channel and listen to a presentation by Kathleen Reeves, who is a practitioner of paganism. And that was our first guest speaker who represented pagan religion. So I would highly encourage you to listen to her presentation. It was really interesting. Now, today we're talking about devotion, D for devotion in our spiritual alphabet. And we have a special guest that Jay McDaniel will be introducing shortly in a minute. But before that, I would just like to say a few things about devotion. Being a Sufi myself, I think this is something which is important for me. And not me only, all spiritual seekers or mystics, they have some form of a devotional practice. And one of our Sufi teachers, Hazrat Inayat Khan, he says that mysticism without devotion is like uncooked food. It can never be assimilated. And interestingly, all faiths have their own rituals. Every religion has its own traditions, and that we find inspired by to find our own devotional practice. But every devotee has their own specific practices which are important for us, which might be different from the larger religious framework or maybe the same. But they're important for us because they ground us within our own faith, but also connect us with that deep mystery out there in the universe. Some seekers dance, others chant, some pray with rosary, some sing hymns, others meditate, others reflect. There are spiritual seekers for whom walking in the nature is a form of devotion. It could be art, it could be painting, it could be sitting in silence. So there are so many different forms of devotion. And to be honest, one of the ones which is coming to my mind is my neighbor in Chanel when I used to live there, who would grease and polish his car twice a week, literally like devotion. And I learned about devotion from his practice of greasing his car, which he would not do. And I've seen him years, every other twice a week, same time, he would come out and grease his car with the utmost love and care. And devotion is the only word which comes to my mind. So devotion, there is no right or wrong way of devoting yourself to an activity or anything. And there is a very beautiful story of Prophet Moses, which is told to us by Rumi in his Masnavi, in which he says that once Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, who's a great prophet in Islam, he was walking and he encountered a shepherd. And the shepherd was taking care of his flock and sheep, and he was talking while he was taking care of the sheep. And he was saying that, "Oh God, where are you? Why can't I find you close to me? And if you ever appear in front of me, I would feed you milk. I would give you a bath. I would clothe you in the best clothes. I would put coal in your eyes. I would put oil in your hair. And I would give you all the nourishment you need. I'll mend your socks. I'll polish your shoes. And he would go on and on. And Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, heard that. And he admonished him. Like Muslims, for Muslims, God is unlike any other creation. And if you find similarity, there are no similarities between God and creation. So Prophet Moses admonished him and says, what are you doing? This is blasphemy. God is not like any creation. You cannot feed him. You cannot take comb his hair. You should not talk about God like that. He's unlike you. You cannot see him, you cannot touch him. So the poor shepherd, he was so disheartened and he cried and he repented. And Prophet Moses went on. And then when he went to the mountain to talk to God, which was a practice, God said, Moses, why did you admonish my dear servant? Why did you break his heart? And then God told him, who authorized you? God said, who authorized you to separate my lover from me? Why do you think it was blasphemy? So was reminded of this story today because for some people, acts of devotion could be blasphemy, but for others, acts of devotion would be just pure outpouring of genuine love. And that's why I think there are no limits and no bounds for devotion and how it is expressed in our daily lives or in our spiritual practices. And with that, I want to pass it on to Jay to introduce our guest speaker of the day, so we can move on with the class.
Well, thanks, Sophia. And we're so glad to have you, Sister Kimberly Prohaska, from St. Scholastica Monastery in Fort Smith. You've been a Benedictine sister now for 30 years. And you've become the prioress now for your monastery. I want to just tell our friends here just a little story. I really don't want to take much of your time. I know everybody wants to hear from you. But I would like to say why I love your monastery, among many, many reasons. So right after September 11th, since I taught the world's religions, I was often asked to come talk about Islam. And one of the first groups ever to call me were the sisters at St. Scholastica, soon thereafter. And of course, their attitude was generous. That's part of what it means to be a Benedictine. They wanted to understand Islam empathetically, appreciatively. That was their impulse. Because so many people were saying so many bad things. And so I drove up to your monastery that day. And I remember, I think that was the first time I'd seen it. And all of a sudden, I thought I was just going to talk to the sisters. And all of a sudden, I saw all these cars pulling up and these people getting out of the cars, and they had Muslim garb on them. The men were wearing hats and the women were veiled. And apparently the sisters had put up signs all over Fort Smith saying, come hear about Islam. And these are Muslims. So there they were. And I think probably very few of them had stepped inside of a monastery before. And you all were so completely generous. And you had set up a little water fountain in the center of where the talk was to be given. And the water fountain was to be a place where we could pray together. Muslims and non-Muslims pray together. You'd anticipated that in advance. And we all felt so welcome there. And I gave my talk, and I think it was ridiculous for me to be giving that talk. And I was looking at the sisters, and they were cheering me on. And I was looking at our Muslim sisters and brothers, and I can imagine the suspicion, what's he going to say? Well, what does he know? And to boot, my presentation was on Islam and women. I mean, what could be more ridiculous for me to be giving that talk? So I must say the Muslim sisters and brothers too were very generous. And so I was in the presence of two generous audiences, Benedictine sisters and Muslim sisters and brothers. And after my talk, one of the Muslim women came up to me and she said, "You did okay." And I said, "Well, thank you very much." And then she looked at me and she said, "Do you think you'll do this again?" And I said, "Probably so." And she said, "Do you need help?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And she said, "I'll help. Next time you give a talk, you just come and ask me. Here's my phone number. I live in Fort Smith. Call me." I gave talks. She was from Syria. I was part of the Muslim Student Association in Syria. I gave talks all the time. I'm comfortable doing that. I'll do that. And I said, "Will you do it tomorrow?" Because I was supposed to give the same talk the very next day at the local Methodist church in Conway. And she came with her husband and her two children, and they gave the talk. Now that's a beautiful story, and I'd love to talk more about that. But see, that was the spirit of your monastery. You create spaces for people to be together, whoever they are. And that's part of your mission in life as Benedictines. So let's turn it to you, Sister Kimberly. You look so young. You must have become a sister when you were 12.
Thank you. Not quite.
But if you would tell us first just the story of how did this happen in your life? How did you decide to become a sister? Give us some background.
Okay. Thank you. And first of all, I want to thank you for your sharing, Jay. That touches my heart deeply, especially in every Benedictine house. The gift of hospitality is very important, and to know that we touched lives like that also blesses us,
Yeah.
and we are very humbled. So thank you so much. So going back to a little bit of who I am a native of Illinois, the Chicagoland area. I grew up in a small family of 12 children. My mother was a convert to the Catholic faith. She was raised both in the Lutheran and the Methodist tradition. And so as a young girl in a family of 8 brothers and 3 sisters, we learned community very easily. And that's another strong element of monastic life. So I feel like God was probably already preparing me for that. But growing up in Chicago, I went to public schools and then later to Catholic schools. I was taught by the Franciscan Sisters of Mokina, Illinois. And I didn't think anyone was more intelligent, more intimidating, and more wonderful than they were. And then in 7th grade, I remember in one of our religion classes, we were asked the question if any of us ever thought about becoming a sister or priest or a deacon or a minister in the church. And to my surprise, my hand was going like this. I'm like watching it going, oh, it's going up. And, so I put my hand out and there were about 5 or 6 girls who were then invited one day, the week later, to go over and tour the convent where the sisters lived. And their house was very simple. We had a little light lunch together. They told us about their life, and that really, really kind of impacted me. So that was in 7th grade. 8th grade rolled around and I discovered something more important, or so I thought at the time, was boys. So I thought, okay, that's pretty much it. I'm going to get married and have kids. I don't think I'm going to be a sister. So went through high school. We moved when I was a freshman from Chicago to Arkansas. My parents wanted to move to North Central Arkansas to semi-retire. And we relocated, and that was quite an adventure. There were a couple of instances in my life. I was born 2 months early, me and my twin brother. And so I was born with a cerebral palsy. And so I had a lot of things to overcome. And I remember my grandparent mothers always saying, You're a strong young lady. God has a purpose for you. And that stayed in my heart and my mind. So I never thought about the religious life for quite some time after moving to Arkansas. And then we moved to Arkansas, and then I had another incident where I was in a severe car accident and was impacted by an injury where I'm visually impaired now with the left eye. I almost died in that car accident. So there was a lot of prayer and wondering and talking to God a lot. But my parents were just incredible. My family was incredible through that accident, and we got past it. So, but I always talk to God no matter what. We went to mass, we went to church. I wasn't super active in church. I went to CCD classes. I joined the choir every once in a while, but so it was kind of interesting how that all started. But eventually, after dating and being engaged once, I just felt like something was not quite right. And so I felt like something was missing in life. So eventually I got in touch with our priest at our parish. I had heard a homily by our senior priest, Father or Monsignor de Klerk was giving a presentation, and he was speaking on vocations. And I didn't think there were any religious houses in Arkansas. I knew there were all over, like Chicago, Philadelphia, and missionaries all over the country. And I didn't want to go to Lima, Peru and fight mosquitoes and who knew what. I just wanted to stay something close to home. But I didn't know if there were any communities in Arkansas. Well, then I learned there were 3 Benedictines, and I didn't know anything about Benedictines at all. And so as part of that story, there was a time where I went in to speak with Father. He got me in touch with the vocation director at Little Rock and Monsignor David LeSueur. And when I was getting ready to go speak to him, I was walking down the hall with Father, and we're going to the office. And so I'm bartering with God, going, okay, God, if I pursue this possibility of religious life or looking into it, if this priest doesn't like call us back, then I will just let it go and go about my life, because I was doing pretty well. And so I was kind of already bartering with God. So I got to the office and asked Father Charlie, I said, okay, we're going to call this priest. And he said, yes. And so he picked up the phone and called, and he ended up having to leave a message. And so I was like, okay, God, you didn't give me any clarity there. I was hoping to get an absolute answer. If he picked up the phone, I knew I needed to pursue it. He didn't answer. I had to leave a message. So I'm like, okay. So we ended up leaving a message. We were sitting there talking for a little bit. The phone rang. Right before I got ready to leave, the phone rang, and it was Father David. And then he told me about 3 communities. He said, there are 3 communities in Arkansas, because he said, I wanted to stay in Arkansas, when he asked me what I was looking for. And I said, well, I'd like a community that prays together, something in the heartland of the US, so I can stay close to family, because that was important. And I knew about the Franciscans and the Dominicans. And he said, well, there are Benedictines. And I said, well, what are Benedictines? And he said, well, there are 3 communities in Arkansas, 2 women's communities and the men's. So I said, oh, so he mentioned Holy Angels Convent and St. Scholastica. When he mentioned St. Scholastica, I had never had this sensation before or since. I remember when he said St. Scholastica, it actually felt like my heart did a click. I actually felt that sensation. I remember going like this, going, wow, what is that? And so he said, have you ever been to Fort Smith? And I said, no, I've been to Jonesboro. Both were about 3 or 4 hours away from where I lived. And I didn't realize at the time that Subiaco was a men's community. I remember that now. But so I asked him about the 3rd one. He said, well, you don't qualify for that. And I said, how come? He said, that's a men's community. And I was like, oh, darn, can't go there. So anyway, we learned about Subiaco later. I ended up inquiring about the community, gave information, and I also knew that I didn't want God to, not God, I didn't want my friends or family to influence me one way or the other about my religious vocation. I wanted that God time alone. So I was very private about it. And so over time, I ended up discerning, and my friends were like, where are you going to go this weekend? And I'm like, I'm going to go to Fort Smith. And I would come back, and they would ask me, well, what's his name? And you know, you're meeting some guy, aren't you? And I'm like, well, no. And I go back to my office, and I would say his name is Jesus. And over time, I ended up coming back to the community. The first visit didn't work out because there were 5 of us that were supposed to attend, and we all had to decline that visit. We revisited about a month later, and it was wonderful to meet women that were thinking about religious life as I was at that time. I was 24 years old when I first inquired. So, and it takes a minimum of 6 years to make the time that you enter. You do interviews and process and that kind of thing. And during that particular year, right before I got ready to enter, I entered at 25, almost 26. I remember kind of pushing back. I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. But then God gives the right person in your place. And if we're paying attention and open, I answered the call. And so it was a gradual unfolding. I wasn't like St. Paul getting knocked off a horse. It would have been so nice if it would have been clear like that as I bartered with God as a young woman. And I did sometimes doubt whether I should or shouldn't, but I knew the second that I walked into this monastery that I was at home. And even though I was a little bit afraid of it, that I didn't feel worthy of it. So it took me a while, but and now I'm still here 30 years later.
So Sister Kimberly, actually, I'd like to ask everybody here, how many of you, are you familiar with the Benedictine way? Raise your hand if you know a little about it. Okay, it looks like most don't.
Okay.
So rather than giving us a talk on the Benedictines, can you walk us through a day?
Sure.
A day.
Okay. A typical day.
What's a day like? Yes.
A typical day. Well, when I first entered the community, there were 167 sisters. Currently, we number about 33, and that includes our 2 novices. And when I first came, the sisters were involved in many ministries all throughout the state. So we used to pray morning prayer very early. We would pray at about 5:45 in the morning. We would have to count the bell would toll, and you would get up, and that was a 10-minute bell to get you to chapel. So the bell would ring, and the community comes together for morning prayer. And we would pray in the morning, and then we would do the Psalms. So it's a chanting of the Psalms back and forth, a holy conversation of the Psalms. And in between there, we would have a reading, the canticle. We would pray, the closing prayer of the Benedictus. And then the Prioress would bless us. And then at the end of that, typically we would have Mass. The liturgy of the Eucharist would follow. After that, the community typically leaves Mass and goes to the dining room or the refectory for our breakfast. And most days that's in silence, unless it's a recreation day. And recreation days are given for feast days or birthdays, typically some type of celebration, and we'll be free to chat. So, but for those of us who aren't typically morning people, I love the silence in the morning. So I'm always grateful for that element in the morning. And so following our morning prayer, breakfast, Mass, we are then sent out to our works, whether our sisters were teaching or in hospital work or in the retreat ministry, whatever we were assigned to by the prioress, they would do. And then we come back together a little before noon to recite the Psalms again for noon prayer. And then we do noon prayer, and it's a shorter version at about 10 minutes or so. And then we would have lunch together, and then the sisters would have time either to go back to their ministries or to take time for a rest. And then we meet again at 5 o'clock in the evening for evening prayer. And then again, the chanting of the Psalms back and forth with the readings. And then at that time, now currently what we do is we read from the Holy Rule of St. Benedict, this rule right here. We take the prioress reads a part of the rule, and she may make say a commentary on it. And so we do hear the rule every single day. And the other, at the close of prayer, then the prioress blesses everyone. And then we have a little bit of time in between where the sisters can use the facility. Sometimes they want to go catch the news. And then we eat dinner at 6 o'clock. And then after that, we help clean up and do all the necessary chores. You have to do dishes, those kinds of things. We do those things in common. And then we have common recreation in the evening. And then night silence usually is about 9 o'clock. We try to be respectful of that so that sisters can get the rest that they need, and then the day starts all over again. Now, Sunday schedule's a little bit different because we have to accommodate our pastor because he's at another parish. So our chaplain. And so it kind of fluctuates depending on the day, and we can change the schedule as needed. But we always pray 3 times a day together. And then we're also asked to do Lectio Divina, which means holy reading. And we can take scripture or something from the Desert Fathers or some reputable holy reading, and we pray with that. And we are called to pray Lectio Divina on our own. And then we have other spiritual practices that we might do. We have other devotions, whether it's the rosary or meditation. And so we can apply those into our lives, depending, journaling, depending on the individual. So, but typically the day is incorporated for the work and the balance of the prayer. Our main work is Ora et Labora, which is to pray together in common. And then the others fall into that.
Now, would you say a little word about the values that are important to you and your community? Just a short word.
Sure. Silence is very revered in the community, a balance of quiet and silence in a world of noise and confusion. So much comes at us. We feel like the element or the gift of silence is very important. We try to implement that. The value of Benedictine hospitality, being welcoming of the stranger or the guest, is a vital part of the community. And then care of the sick and the elderly and of the young are very important elements of the monastic way of life. We try to maintain those as best we can. We do some of those values a little bit better than others, depending on the individual and the times, but those are some of the things that we do.
How about something like simplicity?
The simplicity is very important. Again, that ties in where we make our promises as Benedictines, where we make promises of obedience, conversatio morum, and stability. A conversatio morum is the term which means conversion of life, which also incorporates the elements of simplicity or poverty and celibate living. So those typically the 3 that you would hear of a Catholic religious woman taking are obedience, celibacy, and poverty, where we incorporate conversatio morum and stability, meaning we promise to be with these women in this place. Even though I might be missioned somewhere else, I always have a place to come home. Another religious sister who might be a Dominican, she might be sent out to preach at different places. Or if there's a Franciscan, she might be sent out and her home would be in, say Africa or in Lima, Peru. Even though she has a main monastery, we're different in the fact that we take a vow of stability, meaning that we belong with this community and with these women. And community, the element of community, is a vital part of who we are.
I think one thing that, as I understand it, Sister Kimberly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's kind of 2 different kinds of monastic communities, and one would be that emphasizes more the solitary life in some way, and one that emphasizes finding God in community. And you're in the second type, is that correct?
Right, more so. We were founded from Eichstätt, and Eichstätt, that the order there, they are more solemn or in solitude, more cloistered than we would call ourselves. In the United States, the term cloistered nun or sister are kind of synonymous. They kind of go back and forth. You think of like the Carmelite sisters, which live a monastic lifestyle. They're cloistered, they don't leave, and they even have extern sisters that go out and do their shopping and those kinds of things. And they even maybe take sisters to the doctors, whereas we're more a little bit more available and a little bit more out there, out on mission. So it's kind of a interesting thing. There are certain areas of the community that we call cloistered, and then there's certain things where it isn't, and we can go out. So yes, there is a difference. And then you have like the Cistercian and the Carmelites, and then there's the Olivetan Benedictines, and then there's the Sisters of Perpetual Adoration in Clyde, Missouri. They're more cloistered. So again, it kind of depends on the community and the focal point that they go with.
So I'm going to ask you this is a teasing question because I'll keep a straight face, but it's not straight in sight. So should I assume then that life in community at St. Scholastica consists of the sisters always being entirely and perfectly affectionate with one another and generous and forgiving and caring, and that there are no tensions whatsoever?
That is...
Should I assume that?
That's a nice assumption. However, and we strive for that. That is a goal that we aspire to. But first and foremost, we are very human, and we have weaknesses. We are not perfect by any means. I can remember hearing one of our sisters say when I was a young sister, well, Sister Kimberly, I wasn't born on my knees. I had to kind of learn how to do all of this. And, we have to kind of bump up against each other. And that's where our purification comes from. Our conversion comes from. I remember as a postulant, the prioress telling me at one point, she said, Kimberly, think of it this way. When you're having a difficulty with a sister, and a lot of times, those things will come up. You think about family and that, sometimes you're not going to always get along perfectly with your siblings or your spouse or your other loved ones. You're going to have those moments. When you get 90 to 100 or even 12 women or 3 women together, you're going to have those tensions. But she told me to think about it like this. She said, think of us all being put into this container. We're all a bunch of little rocks. We're little rocks, and we're being all thrown into this container, and God throws us into this container, and he starts turning that container, and we're spinning around, and we're bumping up against each other, and we're doing all this. He said, what is happening is all our rough edges are getting buffered. We're starting to be polished. We're starting to shine. We're starting to become who God knows us to be. And our sisters are beginning to see who we are in the sight of God, to see God in my sister, and to discover the sacred within me. And so it's like taking that time to polish, and community life does that completely. We're human, real women. We have our faults. We're not perfect, and we get there together. And so we're constantly being churned by God in this image of this basket where God is trying to polish us and bring us to where we need to be, where God knows us to be. So that's the hope. So there are difficult moments, that's for sure. And I wish I could say it's perfect. There are times where it can be a little difficult, but that's what brings us to perfection.
I'm actually really glad it's not perfect because I could not measure my life against that standard, but I can measure my life in terms of a group of sisters who are trying to live together and who are deeply human and who pray together and sometimes struggle to forgive, but manage to forgive and want to help the world. And if somebody knocks on the door of the monastery, that's Christ in disguise.
That's right. That's right.
I can identify with. Would you say about the role that older sisters play in monastic life for you today? I think tell the story of the 100-year-old woman and a few others, if you will.
A lot of our sisters have longevity on their side. People tease us about having the Fountain of Youth here at St. Scholastica, and I've heard that probably at other monasteries as well. one of our oldest sisters was Sister de Chantal Highland. She lived to be 105 in 23 days. She was an educator, a native of Texas. She taught for many years. One of her greatest little entertainments for herself was that she was she liked physicality. She loved sports. She liked to skate and dance and do those types of things. She was wonderful and very artistic. She had 3 blood sisters in the community, 3 actual of her siblings in the community as well. And so Sister de Chantal, or Sister D, we called her, she used her walker up until she was almost 100, about 104 years old. She didn't need a walker actually up until then. I think that's right. But I remember so often when I would be coming into chapel, and sometimes I would almost be late or extremely prompt, as I like to say, Sister de Chantal, no matter what time of the day, could be, if we started prayer at 5:45 in the morning, or if we prayed at 7, or if we prayed at 5 o'clock or at 7 o'clock at night, she was in chapel at least 20 minutes early. And she was so faithful. And I found that very edifying to see these women who have constantly lived the rule of Benedict and the call that they had from God, the way that they lived out in her fidelity to the importance of our common prayer and our common life together. That, I'm expected to be here, and I'm here. And she was an incredible witness. Many of our elder wisdom sisters are very much like that. And, when I challenge myself or complain against myself about how I don't do that well, they would say to me, well, I've been doing this a little longer than you. Be patient with yourself. It's okay to be gentle with yourself. Keep at it. And so I just found that very edifying. Here she is, 105 years old, always faithful to the call of what she was asked to do as a Benedictine.
So let's open it up. Thank you so much, Sister.
Sure.
I think we get a feel for you and your life, and let's see what questions or comments people have.
Okay.
Yeah, Tina?
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I found this very fascinating because I have been, well, it's been a long time ago, but had been, I don't know, multiple times, maybe 4 or 5 times over a number of years to Sister Macrina Whitaker's, lectures and so on, and found them extremely edifying, and sometimes would go with a friend, and we maybe would get a room. I think they had rooms where you could have a roommate perhaps. And I
Yes.
even went on, and I don't know if they even offer it anymore, but a solitary retreat. I just went up there for a few days because I needed some silence and some space. And it was a beautiful, I think it was in the spring, and the weather was just gorgeous. And just walking around that beautiful campus with those gorgeous buildings, I just felt like I knew I was in a holy place, but the holiness kind of entered my spirit, and it just was so soothing. I wanted to ask you something real quick, which really is not terribly related, but I taught for 4 years in Catholic schools, 3 in Southern California and 1 at Holy Souls here in Little Rock. Did you ever know, and you may not have, Sister Henrietta Hockel?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have to say, she was the sweetest to me anyway, diminutive, but get them in line disciplinarian that I had ever seen. And actually, I don't know if they can do it anymore, but if the little naughty, and they were usually boys, if the little naughty boys wouldn't, obey after one time or whatever, they were kneeling. This was back in the early 70s, kneeling on the floor, holding 8 or 9 dictionaries. Now that might be considered abuse, but she got away with it. But everybody totally respected her because she ran what I would call a tight ship, and she gave me an excellent recommendation, and I eventually got into public schools. But also I wondered if you knew, I believe she's got to be dead also, Sister Romana Romer.
Yes,
She was
ma'am.
one of my very best friends. I think she's deceased now.
She is. She is.
But we taught in classrooms
I
across
think.
the hall from each other. I believe so. And she was a very, very, very special person also. And, you know, I'm an Episcopalian, and because I taught in Catholic schools and because our liturgy really and our rituals are so similar, I've always had a strong connection and feeling, you know, to the Catholic Church. And I've been to, oh, what's it called? Oh shoot, you were talking about it.
Subiaco?
The monastery, Subiaco. Yeah, I've been there and took a tour once and just was overwhelmed with the gorgeousness of the interior, you know. Oh my goodness. And then one time went, and I'm not sure if it's Benedictine, but I think it is, and I can't remember the name of it. It was north, maybe a little bit central or northwest, maybe of Little Rock, a couple hours drive to a type of hermitage that was beautiful too. What's the name of
So
that?
we need to open it for some other people
I'm
to
sorry.
talk.
I'm
No,
sorry.
that's okay. That's
The
okay. So Sister Kimberly, answer that
I'm
one
sorry.
quickly
I
and then
will.
we'll open it up. Yeah.
House of Prayer, actually,
Right.
that's our place. That was where we were founded from 142
That's right.
years ago.
That's right.
And we have single dwelling hermitages where people can come and pray. Yes, in the mountains
Thank you.
or hills here in Arkansas.
Meg and then Carol.
Okay, mine are quick, but thank you. This was a really, it was so edifying what you said today. I just brought a smile to my face.
Good.
When you talk about psalm rotation, I'm going to assume that is it pretty prescribed? The
Yes.
particular psalms that you do. I'm just wondering how you do
Yes.
that. Okay.
We have 150 Psalms that we try to do within a particular period of time. And Benedict even puts that together in his rule, and he says we can adapt it to our need. And so, you know, he says, you know, that they were able to recite the whole 150 Psalms in a day, where we're lukewarm if we can do it in a week. And sometimes we're, you know, here we are doing it in a month. So it just kind of depends, but we do the Psalms, we chant back and forth. And we see it as a holy conversation, one having a response to the other. So it's a back and forth. And it's really quite lovely. The Gregorian chant was something that the Benedictines were very good at for many years. As we've kind of gotten smaller and in place, we tend to chant. We still take some of the Gregorian chants. One of my favorite seasons in Lent is something that we do. It's called the Tenebrae, and it touches you like nothing else. The Lamentations and things like that. So it's incredible. But we do that back and forth. Yes.
Okay, one more quick sidebar. Common recreation. What's that about?
We come together in community, and it could be, it used to be what the monks sometimes at Subiaco call it forced fun. And, yeah, I gotta love our monks, right? So, and we are monks also. I didn't know if you know that. As Benedictines or as people that take on particular vows, we are monastic. It comes from the word monos, to be one with. And so you can be a female monk or a male monk. So you have a brother monk or a sister monk. And so it's to be one with. But anyway, forced fun or common recreation is where we come together and we might play games or just visit. Sisters might do crafts. It just kind of depends on what they want to do. Some of us are avid domino players, like our cards. There's little groups of sisters that like to do different things, and sometimes we mix it up. And then we do, for big celebrations, we might have little parties and activities that go with themes like Mardi Gras, or I hope this isn't too scandalous, we did like a Super Bowl party, things like that. So, we just sort of try to add that balance of work, prayer, and leisure. And holy leisure is not only just reading and doing those wonderful things, and those are part of holy leisure, taking a walk, but there's also the importance of play, and that everyone needs that. So
thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Carol. Oh, you're muted, Carol.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. Thanks, Sister, for the presentation.
Yes.
I appreciate the devotional, the emphasis on the devotional, but I've lived at St. Ben's, and I know that they're pretty subversive, some of those sisters. They're innovative and creative, and so I want to just check to see that that part of their life is also highlighted, because they have done incredibly
Yes.
creative activities, including an annual retreat for those infected or affected by AIDS. And that was done very early, way before activists began to recognize the need for care, relaxation, connection, community. And they helped create that community for people affected or infected with AIDS, welcoming them as any other guest and providing on-site medical care, activities, deep prayer, and counsel. So I want to celebrate that part of
Yes.
it.
Thank you for that.
Very innovative in its time, and we've continued. I participated with them in that, one facet of that for many, many years. But they also were innovative in bringing ideas and spirituality to the larger community. And so at least at St. Ben's, it became an educational center where the Enneagram was explored. And people who might not have had that opportunity to do that in any other context in church were able to explore that with the sisters under the guidance of specific leadership. And I thought that was pretty amazing, making that available to a larger community. So they were monastic, but they also were an educational and retreat center that opened their arms, particularly to mothers like myself who had 5 kids and needed someplace to go to kind of recharge and visit and connect with spirit. And also the labyrinth and the use of other modalities of prayer and Taizé chants and lots of utilizing a spectrum of techniques to help people recharge, reconnect, and reaffirm their connection to the divine. So thank you, but I wanted to stress that you might not sell your own product as well as someone who.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that so much. And what you're saying is so true. I have to say that on behalf of my own sisters and other Benedictine women across the country or other communities. That is so true. We had our retreat center, we have our labyrinth, we've done our outreach. We were actually kind of called the on the edge of the cusp sisters for so long. Integration of culture in schools. We were the first to integrate in our own high school here when the sisters had the high school. We do a lot in regard to ecology, like we promote programs about fracking and prayer and all the different things that are happening in the world, and we try to really be on the cutting edge of those types of things. When Katrina hit, we welcomed people into our center and had them live with us over a year. Just different little things like that. I mean, not little things, but there are things that we try to do. We still do outreach. So in regard to helping the homeless and people, and what is the need in the community? What is the need in the world? And we try to be present to all of that and stay connected to the needs. So Carol, I really appreciate you bringing that point back, because that is important, because out of our prayer, those things happen. And so thank you so much.
Anybody else? Question, comment, thought?
Sister Kimberly, I was at St. Scholastica on a day very much like this day for a dream retreat, maybe 20 years ago. And to sit there in that retreat and watch the snow, it was a perfectly beautiful experience that I will never forget. It's such a marvelous place.
Thank you so much. And you all mentioned our beloved Macrina, who, forgive me, we miss terribly. She was a vital part of the community. Every sister is a vital part, but she was a spiritual pillar. She probably get mad at me for saying that, but I am so grateful that all of those of you who have been to our house and know that once the pandemic is over, our doors will open again, and we will always try to welcome you back home with us. And those of you who haven't come, please come. We would love it. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to give a tour of our house. It's one of the things I love to do. So, but again, we do offer those retreats still. We have a guest house now. We don't have the retreat center so much, but we still try to sponsor that. And all Benedictine communities try to offer elements of hospitality and sacredness. So I'm grateful that you had a good experience with us, and I hope you come back.
Thank you.
I would like to ask a question. This is Jennifer, and thank you so much, Sister Kimberly. It was a beautiful presentation. My question is, apparently a prioress is an elected position, and I'm wondering who has the privilege to select you, and how last, and I have the administration of that position. I don't understand.
Okay. It's kind of like in the secular world, it's the president. Okay, she's the president. Every monastery is autonomous in their governance, but they're also accountable. So we have a structure where we belong to a federation. There are 3 federations in the United States, Gertrude, Benedictine, Scholastica, and they have each about 13 to 16 different member monasteries of which they're a part. And then after that, we're accountable to the abbot primate, and then of course, the Pope in Rome. So there's that structure. And that's very helpful because, for example, there was a community out west that suffered physical damage to their monastery due to an earthquake. And so they can contact these other monasteries within their federation or elsewhere to get the support they need, whether it's somebody to come in and take in a position, or to get financial help, or what have you. So there's that structure of assistance. And then it also calls us to accountability, because we also get what we call visitations every 4 years, where we have sisters and leadership come in and just kind of see how we're functioning, how are we operating, and how are things. This gives the sisters an opportunity to voice what they need to voice without, if they have trouble with their superior, if they have trouble with the procurator or someone, that they can not only go maybe to the superior, but maybe they need to go elsewhere and they have a safe place to do that. And then that keeps us on track, so we can have what we call challenges that we need to face, or maybe there are things that they applaud and say you need to continue doing. So in regard to the election process, that happens well, it used to be that you were elected in the men's communities for life, and then you can step down. Women's communities have a little more structure. Typically, canon law says you can't be in leadership more than 12 years. So you can break that up into, different ways. So for the longest time, we did 4-4-4, and now we've gone to 6. And we've opted for 1 6-year term, and then we look to have a re-election, and then someone can be postulated. So like at the end of my term, I'm 6-year term. So at the end of my term, I'm technically not eligible for re-election, but there's also a clause that says if the community wants the person to continue and she's willing to do that, she can be postulated, but you have to petition Rome for that. So we take a whole year of discernment. We look at our goals and our needs, and we pray with those goals and needs as a community. We look at that with the federation and with each other, and we say, okay, these are our goals and our needs. Who among us has that gift and talent to lead us to that, to meet those goals to the best of her ability? We know that no one's perfect, that no one's going to be great at everything she does, but we look at that. So the community discerns and prays for a solid year, and it's not like a political election where you go out for votes. It's not like that at all. And then over a particular time frame, we look at those goals, and through our prayer process, 30 days in advance, we pray daily for whoever God is calling. And then the federation comes in and does the election. And then names surface at a particular point, and then we do a cutoff. And so like if you have 8 women, okay, and then you might cut it down to 4. And then out of that 4, 1 woman is chosen out of the group. And then her installation happens at a later date. But then she is declared at that point prioress at the time of installation. So long story
Sister
short.
Kimberly, so it's the sisters who elect.
It's from the membership, right?
Mhm.
The perpetually professed members of the community that actually do the voting. Mhm.
Okay. Well, we're about out of time now, and so I'd like for Sophia to offer a response of any kind you'd like, Sophia, and bring us to
Yeah, we are
closure.
almost at the close, so let's just close today's class. There are 3 words which are standing out to me from this presentation, and they are silence, prayer, and community. They're all equally important to many of us in this room. So firstly, I want to thank you, Sister Kimberly, for being with us here today and sharing your life story with us. It's so inspiring to hear the story of somebody who is answering the call of God that they hear, and answer it so faithfully. It's really motivating for people like me. So thank you so much for being here. Before I today close today's class, I want to introduce 2 things. Number one, we have a wonderful class on silence that happens every month. It's a monthly class. We offer it on Tuesday mornings at 7:30 a.m. right before you start your workday. So if you're interested or anybody's interested in deepening their practice of silence, please email me and I will send you more information about our class on silence. And the last thing which I want to say before we go today is I want to introduce you all to a woman named Rabia Basri, and she's coming to my heart after listening to this presentation by Sister Kimberly. Rabia lived in 8th century, and she was first in a long line of female Sufi mystics in Islam. In fact, she's, I think, the single most famous and influential mystic woman in Islam. She was renowned for her extreme piety, her virtue, her asceticism, and she was the one who introduced the concept of divine love, in which she said that God should be loved just for the sake of God, not out of fear or out of a reward. And her poem is famous, in which she said, "If I adore you out of fear of hell, burn me in hell. And if I adore you out of desire for paradise, lock me out of paradise. And if I adore you for yourself alone, O Lord, do not deny me to your eternal beauty." Now, Rabia lived a beautiful life, and your story reminds me of her, of Rabia, who was a role model to many Muslim women mystics. She lived a life of celibacy. She never married. There is a tradition that, many famous scholars of that time, and even the ruler of Basra, where she lived in Iraq, they sent her proposals of marriage, and she said that I have no time in my life for anyone other than God. And there is this famous story on which I will end. There's a story in which Rabia was seen in Basra, running in the streets of Basra with a torch of fire in one hand and a bucket of water in another hand. And when people asked her, "Rabia, what are you doing with this fire and this water in your hands?" And she said that, "I carry a torch in one hand and a bucket of water in other hand. With these things, I'm going to set fire to the heavens and put out the flames of hell, so that voyagers to God can rip the veils, and none will worship God out of the fear of fire or the promise of reward, but simply for the love of God, because that's the real goal." So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. This presentation will be available on YouTube, and we will see you all next Wednesday. Have a wonderful week, you all.